Welcome back to Community Conversations. I'm your host, Steve Mantis, and my guest today is Cynthia Wesley Esquimaux, the chair of the Truth and Reconciliation at Lakehead University. So Cynthia, you were just, before we took a break, we're talking about the 96 calls for action. Now, where does that come from? Tell us a little bit about the background there.
So the Truth and Reconciliation was established in 2009, I guess, 9, 10, 12.
This is the big national commission.
This is the big national commission. And one of the things that was really important about that commission from the beginning was the understanding that this was not an Indigenous commission, this was a Canadian commission. This is about all of Canada having an opportunity to understand what happened during the Indian residential school period, which ran for about 150 years in this country, and it really put 7 generations of people through, children, let's make it clear, children through a lot of hell, because there was a lot of bad things that happened. There were some good things too, but there was a lot of bad things that happened there, physical violence, sexual violence, and so we are now reaping the ends of that, and that's part of the historic trauma that I was talking about that we have to resolve. Out of that, at the end of the commission, they made 94 calls to action in 22 different categories. So that would include justice and child welfare and education and media and sports and recreation, and there's a number of different categories. And the idea is that rather than making recommendations and saying, you know, we would suggest that you do this, they're saying we're going to make calls to action. We're going to ask Canada to uptake this and do something with it. And so of course, that's also around the time we had a new Prime Minister come in, and the Prime Minister of Canada said, we accept all 94 calls to action and we're going to ensure that they happen. So here we are a year later, because it's almost now a year anniversary, and we have all been working on the 94 calls to action. The Prime Minister talked yesterday at the Assembly of First Nations in Gatineau about all of the different pieces that he's put in place. He's responding to housing crisis. He's, in the context of Indigenous peoples. He's responding to the education crisis. He's responding to health. So he's doing everything he possibly can to ensure that the calls to action get responded to. People like myself are out there on the ground actually talking to different people and ensuring that they understand what those calls to action are about and how they might do something about them. And I think that Canada as a country is actually caught the attention of people right across the board, and they are interested in doing their part and seeing what's happening. Now, one of the things I want to say about reconciliation, because reconciliation what is reconciliation? And people often ask, well, what does it mean? Mm-hmm. And I would say this, I think it's a very personal thing. Reconciliation is not a one-stop shop. This is what it is. It is something different for you. It is just something different for me. But one of the things I think is really, really important here as Canadians that we understand is we will not be able to reconcile with the Indigenous population until we reconcile with ourselves as a country. Until individuals as a country that have come here can understand their own trauma, their own experiences, their own fears, their own biases and beliefs, they will never get to the place where they can reconcile with another population, because there's a barrier in between. And I think that it's really important that people understand that. What I say is to people is things like this: 97% of the population has suffered some form of trauma, whether it's a birth trauma, a parent's death, or something, and the other 3% are lying. Everybody has experienced something that has given them, whether it's about building up fears or building up an inability to, understand how to get into and stay in a good relationship, or, how to raise children, or, whatever, right? So what that takes is empathy for each other. We have to look at each other and understand that we're all in this together. We all have struggled at various points in time, and we all have responded differently. One thing I tell people too is, like, if a bomb went off outside and there's a bunch of people in the room, everybody will be affected, but everybody will react differently. Some people will be crawling under the tables. Some people will be running for the door. Some people will be running for bandages. Some people will be on the phone calling for help. Everybody will respond differently, and the Native community is very much like that. So when you look at the Native community, you can see that some people are really struggling and have chosen to take an addiction up as maybe the way to solve their fear or their pain, and other people are workaholics, and other people are seem pretty balanced and okay. And we have everything like that in our community, just like anybody else does. Mm-hmm. So not everybody is suffering the same way. There are, we do have some problems around addictions that we are trying to deal with. And of course, it's a cyclical thing. If your parents struggled and you pick up the same and nobody bothers to help understand why, then you will struggle and your kids will struggle and their kids will struggle. So what we need to do is we need to understand what is the struggle that we're having, how do we resolve it ourselves, whether what side of the equation you're on, and let's get to it so that we can build a stronger country.
And so you've got the 96 calls for action. 94, I'm sorry. Is that kind of like your job description? That you're to focus on those things, or? Well,
in some ways, yes. In some ways, yes. But also, because I am also an employee of Lakehead, my part of my job description, or maybe a large part of my job description, is to ensure that people at Lakehead are a part of that conversation. That the president of Lakehead is always informed by me as much as possible as to what is happening across the country, what is happening regionally, and what is happening locally when it comes to the work that we're doing as a university to educate Indigenous peoples. So part of my task is to ensure that Lakehead becomes the destination for Indigenous education in the northwest of Ontario. So my job is to look at some of the programming we do and ask questions and say, well, should we not have more Indigenous content in this particular area? Or can we not put a Master's of Indigenous Learning in? Can we not ensure that there's some long distance education for people who are living in remote communities who may not be able to leave their families to come to the South? So my job is to start to create that reconciliation process for the education system that I work within. And the president is very amenable to that. He wants to be a part of that conversation, and the deans and chairs have agreed that this is an important piece for them to do. And so now we just have to mobilize, right? We have to mobilize it so that it actually works very effectively.
And so we're talking about truth and reconciliation. How do those two go together? Like, how does the truth piece fit in to reconciliation?
The truth piece is a lot of both sides I think are equally painful in different ways, right? So the truth piece is important because we have I think it's fair to say that we have a fair bit of racism in the territory. We have a fair bit of misunderstanding.
We're kind of well known in Thunder Bay for racism, unfortunately.
But I think that the truth part is that we haven't really done a good job of educating people and educating each other or trusting each other enough to understand each other. And I was telling you earlier, there's people that have said to me, my life would have been that much richer if I had known about Indigenous community before, if I had had an opportunity to share in the ceremonies, if I had been able to understand the culture, if I had known the history and my role in that history and how we're all a part of this conversation. It's a big conversation that's gone on for 600 years, right? So now we're celebrating 150 years of Canada, but we've been all at this for 600 years. So I think that that's the truth, and the truth part is very painful, which is, I said earlier, you can't get to reconciliation until you face that truth. And the reconciliation part will be painful because we're asking people to put down bias and beliefs that they've carried probably for a long time. Mm-hmm. And that's hard to do, right? It's hard to say, okay, I'll change.
Well, with that, we have to take a short break. Please stay with us. We'll be right back.